sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the ones who teach you the hardest lessons about standing up for yourself. My name is Sasha Thompson, and this is the story of how my wedding day became the catalyst for discovering my own strength, uncovering family secrets, and learning that sometimes the most devastating betrayals lead to the most beautiful transformations. What started as the happiest time of my life quickly turned into a nightmare that would shake the very foundation of everything I believed about family, loyalty, and love. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build something extraordinary.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun streamed through the windows of my childhood bedroom in Riverside, California, casting golden light across the wedding dress hanging on my closet door. 3 months. In just 3 months, I would be walking down the aisle of St. Margaret's Chapel, the same church where my parents had married 26 years ago, before everything fell apart. I was 24 years old, fresh out of graduate school with my master's in elementary education, and completely head over heels in love with Marcus Rivera, a kind-hearted physical therapist I'd met during my student teaching placement. Marcus had this way of making everyone around him feel seen and valued. The elderly patients he worked with adored him. Children gravitated toward his gentle nature, and he had somehow managed to love me through all my family drama without ever making me feel like a burden. Our love story wasn't the kind you see in movies. It was better because it was real. We met when I brought my class to the rehabilitation center where he worked for a community service project. While my 8-year-old students were making cards for the patients, Marcus was patiently helping an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen practice walking with her new prosthetic leg. The way he celebrated her smallest victories, the genuine joy in his eyes when she took 3 steps unassisted, that's when I knew he was different. We'd been together for 2 years, engaged for 8 months, and I had never been more certain of anything in my life. Marcus understood my complicated relationship with my father, David Thompson, and he never pushed me to just get over it the way some people did. He knew about the divorce when I was 16, about how Dad had left Mom for his secretary, Brielle Hoffman, who was only 8 years older than me. He knew about the awkward family dinners where Brielle tried too hard to be my friend, and how Dad seemed to become a completely different person around his new wife. What Marcus didn't know, what none of us knew, was how far Brielle would go to maintain her position as the center of Dad's universe. It started with small things. When I announced my engagement, Brielle immediately began planning her own elaborate anniversary party for the same month as my wedding. When I mentioned my dress shopping appointment, she suddenly needed emergency surgery that required Dad's full attention. When I shared my excitement about the venue we'd booked, the beautiful Magnolia Gardens, where we'd have both the ceremony and reception, Brielle developed a mysterious illness that had Dad rushing her to doctor appointments every weekend. But I was so caught up in wedding planning bliss that I dismissed these incidents as coincidences. Marcus and I spent our evenings addressing invitations, tasting cakes, and dreaming about our future. We'd found a charming 2-bedroom apartment near the school where I'd been hired to teach 2nd grade in the fall. Everything was falling into place perfectly. The first real crack in my perfect world came during what should have been a routine family dinner at Dad's house in the affluent neighborhood of Hillcrest Estates. Brielle had been unusually quiet throughout the meal, picking at her food and placing her hand on her stomach in a way that seemed almost theatrical. Dad kept glancing at her with concerned looks, and I could feel the tension building like a storm about to break. "Sasha, honey," Dad said finally, setting down his fork with the kind of deliberate movement that always preceded important announcements, "Brielle has something wonderful to share with you." I looked across the table at my stepmother, this woman who had somehow convinced my father to abandon the family he had built for 16 years. At 32, Brielle was undeniably beautiful. Long blonde hair, perfect figure, the kind of effortless elegance that made other women feel inadequate. But there was something in her eyes that night, a gleam of triumph that made my stomach clench with unease. "I'm pregnant. I'm 12 weeks along," she announced, her voice carrying a strange mixture of joy and something else I couldn't quite identify. The words hit me like a physical blow. Not because I wasn't happy about having a sibling. Despite everything, part of me was genuinely excited about that prospect. What knocked the wind out of me was the way she delivered the news, like she was claiming victory in a competition I didn't know we were having. Dad immediately launched into rapturous celebration mode, talking about baby names and nurseries and how this child would be a fresh start for our family. The irony was lost on me that he'd never shown this level of enthusiasm for any milestone in my life since the divorce. That's wonderful," I managed to say, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my face. "Congratulations!" But Brielle wasn't done. "Of course this changes everything," she continued, her hand moving to her still flat stomach in that theatrical gesture again. "David and I have been talking, and we really need to start preparing for the baby. The nursery, the baby shower, getting everything ready."
"The baby shower," Dad repeated, and I caught the meaningful look that passed between them. My chest tightened with a premonition of disaster. "When are you thinking of having it?" I asked carefully, though part of me already knew what was coming. "Well, that's the thing," Brielle said, her voice taking on a tone of practiced regret. "My doctor says the baby is due in early October, which means the shower really needs to be in August. And you know how these things are. We need to book venues well in advance." August. My wedding was August 15th. "I'm sure we can work around Sasha's wedding," Dad said, but his tone lacked conviction. "There are plenty of weekends in August." Brielle's perfectly manicured fingers drummed against the table. "Actually, there's a complication. My mother is flying in from Phoenix, and she can only come the second weekend of the month. You know how important family is, David. This might be her only chance to meet her grandchild before the birth." The second weekend of August. August 15th was a Saturday, the second Saturday of the month. "Brielle," I said slowly, my voice carefully controlled, "that's my wedding day." "Oh!" she gasped, covering her mouth with her hand in a display of surprise that would have impressed community theater directors. "I completely forgot. What are the chances?" What were the chances, indeed? In a month with 4 full weekends, she'd somehow landed on the exact date I'd been planning for 8 months. Dad looked between us, clearly uncomfortable, but already beginning to formulate his response. I could see it in his eyes, the same look he'd had when he told Mom he was leaving, when he'd missed my high school graduation for a weekend getaway with Brielle, when he'd chosen his new life over the daughter who'd spent 16 years believing she was the most important thing in his world. Maybe you could move the wedding," he suggested, hesitantly. "I know it's a big ask, but Brielle's condition is delicate, and her mother—" The rest of his words faded into background noise as the reality of the situation crashed over me. This wasn't about scheduling conflicts or family obligations. This was about power, about Brielle marking her territory and ensuring that even my wedding day would somehow revolve around her. I thought about Marcus, probably at home grading patient files and looking forward to hearing about my family dinner. I thought about my mother, who had spent the last month helping me address invitations and was so excited to see me happy after years of watching me struggle with Dad's abandonment. I thought about the deposits we'd put down, the vendors we'd booked, the friends and family who'd already requested time off work to celebrate with us. But mostly, I thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who would wait by the window every Friday for Dad to pick me up for our weekend together. The one who believed that family meant showing up for each other no matter what. "I need some air," I said, standing abruptly from the table. "Sasha, honey, let's talk about this," Dad called after me, but I was already walking toward the back door.
I found myself in Dad's perfectly manicured backyard, the same space where he used to push me on the swing set that was no longer there. The August evening was warm, but I felt cold down to my bones. This was supposed to be the happiest time of my life, and instead I was standing in my father's backyard, wondering how someone who was supposed to love me unconditionally could ask me to sacrifice my wedding day for his new wife's social event. That night, as I drove home to my apartment, I called Marcus and told him everything. He listened without judgment, offering comfort and practical solutions in equal measure, but even as he reassured me that we'd figure it out together, I could hear the underlying sadness in his voice. This wasn't how either of us had envisioned our engagement period. We could change the date, I found myself saying, hating every word. Maybe September. Sasha, Marcus said gently, do you want to change the date? The question hung in the air between us. Did I want to change the date? Did I want to uproot months of planning, disappoint our guests, and potentially lose deposits just to accommodate my stepmother's manipulation? No, I don't want to change anything, I whispered. Then we won't, he said with quiet certainty. This is our day, and we've done nothing wrong. If your father wants to prioritize a baby shower over his daughter's wedding, that's his choice to make, but it doesn't have to be yours. As I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling and trying to process the evening's events, I had no idea that this was just the beginning. I couldn't have imagined that within weeks, my entire understanding of my family would be shattered, that secrets would be revealed, and the wedding I was fighting so hard to protect would become the catalyst for the most important transformation of my life. All I knew was that something had shifted inside me during that conversation with Marcus. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of something I'd almost forgotten existed, the fierce determination to stand up for myself, to refuse to be diminished by people who claimed to love me while treating me as disposable. I didn't know it yet, but that spark would soon become a flame that would illuminate truths I never wanted to see, and ultimately light the way to a strength I never knew I possessed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of uncomfortable phone calls, family tension, and sleepless nights. Dad had started what I now recognize as a carefully orchestrated campaign to wear down my resistance. It began subtly. Concerned voicemails about Brielle's delicate condition and how stress might affect the baby. Then came the guilt trips disguised as heart-to-heart conversations about family unity and making sacrifices for the people we love. What made it worse was that some of it seemed genuine. Dad would call me at work during my lunch break, his voice heavy with what sounded like real anguish, talking about how torn he felt between his daughter and his pregnant wife. He painted himself as the victim, caught in the middle, desperate to make everyone happy, but unable to see any solution other than me postponing my wedding. "Sasha, you have to understand," he said during one particularly manipulative call. "Brielle is having complications. The doctor said stress could trigger early labor. Her mother hasn't seen her in 2 years, and this might be the only chance." I found myself pacing my empty classroom after hours, phone pressed to my ear, listening to my father essentially ask me to sacrifice my happiness for his wife's baby shower. The worst part was how reasonable he made it sound, how he framed it as a temporary inconvenience, rather than the complete upheaval of months of planning and emotional investment. But something had fundamentally changed in me since that dinner. Maybe it was Marcus's unwavering support, or maybe it was finally reaching the limit of how much I was willing to bend for people who never seemed to bend for me. Whatever it was, I found myself pushing back in ways that surprised even me. "Dad, I've been planning this wedding for 8 months, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We've paid deposits, sent invitations, requested time off work. Our friends and family have made arrangements. You're asking me to turn my life upside down for a baby shower that could literally happen any other weekend."
It's not that simple, honey. Brielle's mother can fly in any weekend. Or Brielle can have the shower in Phoenix. Or in September. Or October. There are dozens of solutions that don't involve me changing my wedding date. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a coldness I remembered from my teenage years, from the period right before the divorce, when everything I did seemed to irritate him. "I'm disappointed in you, Sasha. I thought I raised you to be more considerate of family." The words stung because they were designed to do so. But instead of crumbling like I might have years earlier, I felt something crystallize inside me, a clarity about who my father really was and what our relationship had become. "You did raise me to be considerate of family," I replied quietly. "That's why I can't understand why you're asking me to be inconsiderate of Marcus, of Mom, of all the people who love me enough to celebrate the most important day of my life." That conversation ended with Dad hanging up on me for the first time since I was 16 years old. Marcus found me crying in our apartment that evening, not from sadness, but from a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief that I'd finally stood up to my father, and grief for the relationship I was realizing had never been as loving or unconditional as I had believed. "I'm proud of you," Marcus said simply, pulling me into his arms. "I know that was hard." He hung up on me," I said, my voice muffled against his chest. "His own daughter, and he hung up on me because I won't rearrange my entire life for his wife's baby shower?" "His loss," he murmured. "And honestly, Sasha, maybe it's time you started seeing this situation clearly. This isn't about scheduling conflicts. This is about control." Control. The word hit me like a revelation. Looking back over the past 8 years since Dad married Brielle, I could see the pattern I'd been too close to recognize. Every milestone in my life had somehow become secondary to whatever Brielle needed or wanted. My high school graduation conflicted with their anniversary trip. My college graduation was overshadowed by Brielle's promotion party. Even smaller moments, birthday dinners, holiday celebrations, casual visits, always seemed to revolve around her schedule, her needs, her comfort. And I had enabled it every single time. I'd rearranged plans, lowered expectations, and convinced myself that being flexible was the mature thing to do. I told myself that Dad was happy, and that was what mattered. But now I was being asked to sacrifice my wedding day, and suddenly the pattern was impossible to ignore. That weekend, I decided to do something I'd never done before. I reached out to Mom for advice about Dad. Our relationship had been complicated since the divorce. She'd worked hard not to poison me against my father, which I had appreciated, but which had also left me without a realistic perspective on his behavior. We met for coffee at our old favorite spot, Sunrise Cafe, in downtown Riverside, where she used to take me for hot chocolate after school when I was little. Mom looked older than her 50 years, with silver threading through her brown hair and the lines around her eyes that spoke of too much worry and too little joy. But she'd rebuilt her life after the divorce, working her way up from receptionist to office manager at a local law firm, dating occasionally, and finding happiness in small, consistent ways.
"I was wondering when you'd want to talk about this," she said after I'd explained the situation. "I've been watching you dance around your father's selfishness for years, hoping you'd eventually see it for what it is." Her directness surprised me. "You never said anything." "Because you weren't ready to hear it, and because it wasn't my place to destroy your relationship with your father. I figured you'd come to your own conclusions eventually." Mom stirred her coffee thoughtfully, choosing her words carefully. "Sasha, your father isn't a bad man, but he's a weak one. He spent the last 8 years proving to Brielle that she's more important than anything else in his life, including you. Every time you accommodated her demands, every time you made yourself smaller to make her more comfortable, you helped him avoid dealing with the reality of what he was doing to his daughter." The words should have hurt, but instead they felt like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking into place. "So what am I supposed to do? Cut him out of my life?" "You're supposed to stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm," she said firmly. "You're supposed to have your wedding on the day you planned, surrounded by people who actually prioritize your happiness. And you're supposed to let your father face the consequences of the choices he's been making for years."
That conversation with Mom was the turning point. For the first time in my adult life, I had permission from myself and from someone who loved me to stop trying to manage other people's emotions at the expense of my own well-being. I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Marcus was in the kitchen making dinner, and when I walked through the door, he took one look at my face and smiled. "You look different. Good different." "I think I'm done," I said, surprising myself with how certain I sounded. "I'm done trying to fix this situation. I'm done making myself miserable trying to accommodate people who wouldn't do the same for me. We're having our wedding on August 15th, and if Dad chooses a baby shower over his daughter's wedding, that's his choice to live with." Marcus set down the wooden spoon he'd been stirring pasta sauce with and crossed the kitchen to kiss me. "There's my fierce fiancé," he said against my lips. I was wondering when she'd show up. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I called Dad back and set boundaries. "I wanted to let you know that Marcus and I have made our decision. We're keeping our wedding date. We understand if you choose not to attend because of Brielle's baby shower, but we won't be changing our plans." "Sasha, you're being unreasonable." "I'm being decisive," I corrected. "For the first time in years, I'm putting my own needs first, and I'm not going to apologize for it. I love you, Dad, and I hope you'll be there to walk me down the aisle. But if you're not, I'll walk myself, and I'll be proud to do it." The conversation was short, and it ended with Dad saying he needed to think. But for the first time in months, I wasn't anxious about his response. I'd said what I needed to say, and whatever he decided, I would be okay. Over the next week, something remarkable happened. Instead of the family crisis I'd been dreading, I found myself surrounded by an outpouring of support. My aunts and uncles, who had stayed neutral during my parents' divorce, began calling to express their excitement about the wedding and their confusion about the supposed scheduling conflict. Family friends reached out to offer help with last-minute details. Even some of Dad's relatives quietly let me know they thought Brielle's demands were unreasonable. Most surprisingly, I heard from my step-grandmother, Dad's mother, who had never been particularly warm towards Brielle. "Honey, I want you to know that your grandfather and I will be at your wedding no matter what. We've been watching this situation unfold, and we're not impressed with your father's priorities." The support felt like sunshine after months of clouds. I realized I'd been so focused on trying to win Dad's approval that I'd forgotten about all the other people who loved me unconditionally, who were excited to celebrate my happiness without asking me to compromise at first. But the biggest awakening came from an unexpected source. 3 days after my boundary-setting conversation with Dad, my phone rang with a call from someone I hadn't heard from in over a year. Jessica Martinez, Brielle's younger sister. "Sasha, this is Jessica. I hope it's okay that I'm calling you directly." Jessica had always been the black sheep of the Hoffman family, the sister who'd refused to play along with Brielle's dramatics, who'd called out her manipulation, and who'd been gradually frozen out of family events as a result. "Of course it's okay," I said, genuinely surprised to hear from her. "How are you doing?" "I'm fine, but I'm calling about this wedding situation. Sasha, I think there are some things you need to know about my sister." The tone of her voice made my stomach clench with apprehension. "What kind of things?" "Things about her pregnancy. Things about why she's so insistent on having her baby shower on your wedding day. And things about what she did to your father's previous relationships." I sank into a chair, sensing that whatever Jessica was about to tell me would change everything. "I'm listening," I said quietly. And with those 2 words, my awakening was about to become something much more profound and much more devastating than I could have possibly imagined.
Jessica's words hung in the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. I gripped my phone tighter, my heart racing as I tried to process what she was implying about her sister, my stepmother. "Jessica, what exactly are you trying to tell me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause before she responded, and I could hear her taking a deep breath,
as if steeling herself for what came next. Sasha, my sister has a pattern. She's done this before. Not the fake pregnancy part, but the manipulation, the control, the need to be the center of attention at all times. Your father isn't her first victim, and honestly, the way she's handling your wedding situation is exactly what she did to break up her previous relationships. My mind reeled. What do you mean, break up her previous relationships? Brielle was engaged twice before she met your father. Both times, she manufactured crises right before major events in her partner's lives. The first guy, Michael, was supposed to start his own business. Suddenly, Brielle had a family emergency that required him to liquidate his startup funds to help her. The second one, David, different David, was about to buy his first house. Brielle convinced him to loan her the down payment for what she claimed was a temporary family crisis. Both relationships ended within months. I felt sick. The calculated nature of what Jessica was describing made my skin crawl. But Dad, they've been married for 8 years. Because your father is different. He's successful, stable, and most importantly, he came with a daughter she could use as a test case for her control tactics. Every time you gave in to her demands, every time you rearranged your life to accommodate her, you were unknowingly proving to her that her manipulation worked. The room seemed to spin around me. Years of memories flooded back. Not just the big moments I'd already recognized, but smaller incidents that now took on a sinister new meaning. The times Brielle had accidentally scheduled conflicts with my plans, the way she'd insert herself into conversations between Dad and me, the subtle comments designed to make me feel guilty for spending time with my father. Jessica, why are you telling me this now? Because what she's doing with your wedding is different. It's escalated. And because, she hesitated again, because I don't think she's actually pregnant. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? I've been around Brielle for 2 real pregnancies, our cousins. She doesn't act like someone who's carrying a baby. No morning sickness, no fatigue, no food aversions. She's drinking wine when she thinks no one's looking. And the timing is just too convenient, Sasha. Your engagement announcement, then suddenly she's pregnant and needs a baby shower on your exact wedding date? I slumped back in my chair, trying to process this information. Could my stepmother really be faking a pregnancy to sabotage my wedding? It seemed too outrageous, too cruel, even for someone I'd never particularly liked. But Dad, they've been married for 8 years. Because your father sees what he wants to see. He's so invested in being the devoted husband that he doesn't question anything. As for doctors, Jessica's voice dropped. I did some digging. The obstetrician she's been seeing, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, I called the office. There's no record of Brielle Hoffman or Brielle Thompson as a patient. The phone nearly slipped from my trembling hand. Are you sure? I'm sure. Sasha, I think my sister is faking this entire pregnancy, and I think she's planning to either fake a miscarriage right after your wedding is ruined, or she's going to claim she lost the baby due to the stress of the conflict with you. I closed my eyes, feeling a mixture of rage and devastating sadness wash over me. Not just for what this revelation meant about Brielle, but for what it confirmed about my father. Even if he wasn't actively participating in this deception, he was so blinded by his wife's manipulation that he was willing to sacrifice his daughter's happiness based on lies. What am I supposed to do with this information? I asked. That's up to you, Jessica said gently. But I couldn't watch her destroy your wedding dye and stay silent. You deserve to know what you're really dealing with. After Jessica hung up, I sat in my apartment for over an hour, staring at the wall and trying to make sense of everything. Marcus wouldn't be home for another 2 hours, and I was grateful for the solitude. I needed time to think, to decide how to handle this bombshell. My first instinct was to call Dad immediately and confront him with Jessica's accusations, but something held me back.
Maybe wisdom, maybe fear, or maybe just the realization that accusations without proof would only make me look desperate and vindictive. Instead, I did something that surprised even me. I opened my laptop and began researching. If Brielle was truly faking a pregnancy, there would be evidence. Medical records, insurance claims, prescription medications, something had to exist that would either confirm or deny Jessica's suspicions. What I found in the next few hours changed everything. I started with social media, looking through Brielle's posts from the past 3 months. What I saw was disturbing in its calculated nature. Every pregnancy-related post was generic. Stock photos of baby shoes, inspirational quotes about motherhood, but no actual photos of herself showing any signs of pregnancy. For someone who documented every meal and outfit on Instagram, the absence of typical pregnancy content was glaring. Then I remembered something. 3 weeks ago, Brielle had mentioned getting blood work done to check on the baby's development. She'd made a big show of scheduling the appointment, talking about how important prenatal care was, and even asking Dad to drive her because she was too nervous to go alone. But I also remembered that she'd gone shopping immediately afterward, posting photos of herself trying on clothes at the mall. Would a woman who just had potentially stressful medical tests really go shopping for hours? It seemed odd, but I dismissed it at the time. Now, though, it felt like another piece of a disturbing puzzle. I called the medical laboratory she'd mentioned, Coastal Diagnostics in Riverside. Pretending to be confirming an appointment, I asked about their pregnancy monitoring services. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said after I gave Brielle's name, "but we don't have any records for that patient. Are you sure you have the right location?"
My heart pounded. "Could you check under Brielle Hoffman or Thompson?" "I've checked both names, ma'am. No records in our system." I hung up, feeling like I was falling into an abyss. Jessica's suspicions were beginning to look less like family drama and more like documented fact. When Marcus came home that evening, he found me surrounded by printouts, notes, and my laptop still open to various medical websites. "Whoa," he said, setting down his work bag and surveying the scene. "What's all this?" I told him everything. Jessica's call, her accusations, the research I'd been doing, the phone calls to medical offices. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. "Sasha, if this is true, if she's really faking a pregnancy to manipulate your wedding, this isn't just about us anymore. This is about your father being in an abusive relationship." The word abusive stopped me cold. I'd been so focused on how Brielle's behavior affected me that I hadn't considered what it meant about her treatment of Dad. But Marcus was right. If she was willing to fake a pregnancy to control a situation, what else had she been lying about? What other ways had she been manipulating and deceiving the man I'd once considered the strongest person in my life? "What do we do?" I asked. Marcus sat down beside me, taking my hands in his. "We have our wedding on August 15th, just like we planned. But we also document everything we can, and we prepare for the possibility that your father is going to need help when this all comes crashing down." That night, I made the most difficult decision of my adult life. I chose to commit fully to my own path, regardless of the family chaos swirling around me. I called our wedding planner, confirmed all our arrangements, and asked her to send a final guest count to the venue. I ordered my wedding shoes, finalized the menu, and even added a few special touches I'd been considering: string quartet music for the ceremony processional and a champagne toast for all our guests. More importantly, I wrote a letter to my father. "Dad, I want you to know that Marcus and I are moving forward with our wedding on August 15th as planned. This decision has nothing to do with anger or spite, and everything to do with building a life based on honesty, commitment, and mutual respect. I love you, and I will always be your daughter. But I can no longer participate in family dynamics that require me to sacrifice my happiness for other people's manipulation. I've spent too many years making myself smaller to accommodate situations that were never really about compromise. You will always be welcome in my life, but only on terms that honor both of us as adults who deserve to be treated with respect. I hope that someday you'll understand why I had to draw this line. Your wedding invitation stands. I would love nothing more than to have you walk me down the aisle. But if you choose not to come because of Brielle's demands, I want you to know that I'll be okay. I have people in my life who show up for me unconditionally, and I'm grateful for that gift. I hope you'll choose to be one of them. Love, Sasha. I mailed the letter the next morning, and with it, I felt a sense of finality settle over me. Whatever happened next, I had committed to my own worth and my own future. I had chosen Marcus, chosen our love, and chosen to build a life that wouldn't be held hostage by other people's dysfunction. The response came faster than I expected. 3 days after I mailed my letter, Dad called. His voice was different, tired, confused, and for the first time in years, uncertain. Sasha, we need to talk. Can you come over tonight without Marcus? Just you and me. Something in his tone made my chest tighten with hope and fear in equal measure. Is everything okay? I don't know, he said quietly. I honestly don't know anymore. But I think I owe you a conversation. A real one. As I drove to his house that evening, I had no idea that I was about to witness the beginning of my father's awakening to 8 years of deception. I didn't know that Brielle's carefully constructed web of lies was about to begin unraveling, and that my commitment to my own truth would be the catalyst that finally opened Dad's eyes. All I knew was that for the first time in my adult life, I was walking into a family confrontation from a position of strength, ready to stand by my choices regardless of the consequences. And that commitment to myself, to Marcus, to the life we were building together was about to be tested in ways I never could have imagined. The drive to Dad's house felt like traveling through a time warp. Every familiar street corner held memories. The park where he taught me to ride a bike, the ice cream shop where we celebrated my good report cards, the intersection where I had cried in his passenger seat after my first heartbreak at 16. Now I was 24, engaged, and about to have a conversation that would either rebuild our relationship on honest ground or confirm that it had been built on quicksand all along. Dad answered the door himself, which immediately struck me as odd. Usually, Brielle was the first to greet visitors, orchestrating social interactions like a conductor leading an orchestra. Tonight, the house felt different, quieter, less performative somehow. She's at her book club, Dad explained, reading my expression. Won't be back until late. We settled into his home office, a room I'd always associated with serious conversations. This was where he'd told me about the divorce, where we'd discussed college applications, where he'd awkwardly attempted to explain why he was marrying someone closer to my age than his own. The leather chairs faced each other across a small coffee table, creating an intimacy that felt both familiar and foreign. I got your letter, Dad said without preamble, pulling the pages from his desk drawer. I could see my handwriting, but also notes in his handwriting along the margins. Questions, underlines, what looked like a timeline of events. I've been doing some thinking, he continued, and I noticed how much older he looked than just a month ago. Gray stubble shadowed his jaw, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Actually, I've been doing some investigating. The word investigating made my pulse quicken. What kind of investigating? Dad leaned forward, clasping his hands together in a gesture I remembered from childhood, his serious conversation posture. Sasha, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you heard any concerns about Brielle's pregnancy? The question hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. This was my chance to share what Jessica had told me, but I also knew that once I spoke these words aloud to my father, there would be no taking them back. Dad, what prompted that question? Answer me first, please. I took a deep breath. Yes, I've heard some concerns. Something shifted in his expression, a mixture of relief and devastation that told me he'd been hoping I'd say no while expecting I'd say yes. From Jessica, he said.
It wasn't a question. She called me. She said Brielle has patterns of behavior that she's concerned about. Dad nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. She called me too. 3 days ago, right after you sent that letter. This was a development I hadn't expected. Jessica called you? She told me she'd already talked to you, and she said she couldn't stay quiet anymore. She said things about her sister that... He rubbed his face with both hands. Things that made me start looking at the past 8 years very differently. I waited, sensing that Dad needed to work through this at his own pace. I started small, he said, pulling out a manila folder from his desk drawer. I called Dr. Mitchell's office to confirm Brielle's next appointment. No record of her as a patient. Then I checked our health insurance claims. No prenatal visits, no pregnancy-related charges. Nothing. My heart hammered against my ribs. What did you do then? I went through her things. The admission seemed to cause him physical pain. I know that sounds terrible, and I've never done anything like that before. But I had to know. I found her birth control pills, Sasha, hidden in the back of her jewelry box. The prescription was filled 2 weeks after she told us she was pregnant. The room felt like it was spinning. Even though Jessica's suspicions had prepared me for this possibility, hearing the confirmation from my father's own investigation was devastating. There's more, Dad continued, his voice growing stronger as he spoke, as if sharing the truth was giving him energy. I started thinking about other things that never made sense. The emergency surgery she needed right when you were dress shopping. I called the hospital. No record of any procedure. The complications that required doctor visits every weekend during your wedding planning. I checked the calendar on her phone. Shopping trips, spa appointments, lunch dates with friends. Each revelation felt like another weight lifted off my shoulders and placed on my father's. I could see him processing 8 years of deception in real time, and it was heartbreaking to witness. Dad, I'm so sorry. Don't, he said firmly. Don't apologize for her behavior, and don't apologize for standing up to me when I was asking you to accommodate her lies. You did exactly what you should have done.
We sat in silence for a moment, both processing the magnitude of what had been revealed. There's something else, Dad said finally. The baby shower. I confronted her about the scheduling conflict, told her she needed to pick a different date. Her reaction? He shook his head. She became hysterical, started talking about losing the baby from stress, about how I didn't care about our family, about how your selfishness was going to cause a miscarriage. The manipulation was so textbook, it was almost impressive in its audacity. What are you going to do? I asked. Dad stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where I'd played as a child during weekend visits. I've already started. This afternoon, while she was out, I called a divorce attorney. I also called a private investigator to help document everything properly. The words hit me like a thunderbolt. You're divorcing her? I'm divorcing her. The certainty in his voice was something I hadn't heard from my father in years. I can't live with someone who would fake a pregnancy to manipulate my relationship with my daughter. I won't live with someone who's been lying to me about doctor's visits, emergencies, and God knows what else for 8 years. I felt tears building behind my eyes, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of hope, of something that felt remarkably like pride in my father for finally seeing clearly. But Sasha, he continued, turning back to face me, I need to ask for your forgiveness. Not just for this situation, but for the past 8 years. I let her come between us. I prioritized her comfort over your well-being. I asked you to make sacrifices that I should never have requested, and I ignored signs that should have been impossible to miss. The apology I'd been waiting years to hear was finally coming, but it felt different than I'd imagined. Instead of vindication, I felt sadness for all the time we'd lost, and hope for what we might rebuild. I forgive you, I said, and meant it. But Dad, Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. If we're going to have a relationship moving forward, it has to be based on honesty and respect. No more asking me to accommodate unreasonable demands. No more putting other people's manipulation ahead of our relationship. Agreed, he said without hesitation. Completely agreed. And I want to walk down the aisle at my wedding. Not because I need you to validate my choices, but because I want to share that moment with my father who finally sees me clearly. Dad's eyes filled with tears. I would be honored to walk you down the aisle. And Sasha, I want you to know I'm proud of you. You handled the situation with more maturity and strength than I did. You stood up for yourself when I failed to stand up for you. The next few hours passed in a blur of planning and strategy. Dad explained that he wanted to handle the divorce quietly and quickly before Brielle realized he'd discovered her deceptions. The private investigator would document evidence of the fake pregnancy and any other fraudulent behavior. Dad would continue acting normally until after my wedding to avoid any last-minute sabotage attempts. "What about the baby shower?" I asked. Dad's smile was grim but determined. "There won't be one. Tomorrow, I'm going to tell her that I've realized the scheduling conflict with your wedding is unacceptable and we need to postpone the shower until after the baby is born." "How do you think she'll react?" "Badly," he said with certainty. "She'll probably escalate, try to create some new crisis to regain control of the situation. But I'm done being manipulated, and I'm done letting her manipulate you." As I prepared to leave that evening, Dad walked me to my car, something he hadn't done in years. "Sasha, I want you to be prepared for the possibility that she might try to contact you directly. She might attempt to paint me as the villain in this situation, or create some new emergency that requires your attention." "Let her try," I said, and I was surprised by the strength in my own voice. I'm done being afraid of her dramatics. Dad hugged me then, a real hug that lasted longer than our perfunctory greetings had in years. "I love you, and I'm going to be the father you deserved all along." Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, genuine excitement about my wedding day. Not just because the family drama was resolving, but because I was finally going to marry Marcus surrounded by people who truly supported us. People who chose love over manipulation, honesty over convenience, and celebration over control. I called Marcus from the car and told him everything. His response was characteristically perfect. "I'm proud of you, and I'm proud of your dad for finally doing the right thing. This is going to be the wedding we always dreamed of." "It's going to be better," I said, meaning every word, "because we fought for it." But even as I celebrated this breakthrough with my father, I knew the climb wasn't over. Brielle still believed she was in control of the situation, still thought her fake pregnancy would force me to change my wedding date. She had no idea that her web of lies was about to collapse around her, and that she was married to a man who was secretly preparing to leave her. The next few weeks would test everything I'd learned about standing up for myself, because a cornered manipulator is often a dangerous one. But for the first time in this entire ordeal, I felt ready for whatever came next. I had my father back, I had Marcus by my side, and I had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. The climb towards my wedding day was about to get much steeper, but I was no longer climbing alone.
The calm lasted exactly 4 days. I should have known that Brielle wouldn't go quietly when Dad confronted her about postponing the baby shower. I should have anticipated that a woman capable of faking a pregnancy for months would have contingency plans for when her lies started unraveling. But nothing could have prepared me for the nuclear option she chose to deploy. It started on a Wednesday morning at 6:47 a.m. with a phone call that shattered my world. I was getting ready for work, standing in front of my bathroom mirror applying mascara, when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I wouldn't answer unknown calls so early, but something made me pick up. "Sasha Thompson?" The voice was professional, clinical. "Yes? This is Dr. Rebecca Chen from Riverside General Hospital. I'm calling because your stepmother, Brielle Thompson, was admitted to our emergency department last night. She's listed you as her emergency contact. My mascara wand froze halfway to my lashes. Emergency contact? That can't be right. What happened? Is she okay? She suffered what appears to be a miscarriage. She's stable now, but she's been asking for you. She says it's urgent that you come in immediately. The bathroom seemed to tilt around me. A miscarriage. Of course. Jessica had predicted this exact scenario, that Brielle would fake a pregnancy loss and blame it on the stress of our conflict. But hearing it from a real doctor, from a real hospital, made it feel devastatingly real. Can you hold on for just a moment? I called Dad immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. It went straight to voicemail. Then I tried Marcus, but he was already at the clinic with his first patient of the day. Finally, I called the hospital back. Dr. Chen, I'm going to be honest with you. My stepmother and I have a complicated relationship, and I'm not sure why I would be listed as her emergency contact. Is my father there, David Thompson? No, she specifically said he's out of town on business and unreachable. She said you were the only family member who could come in. Out of town on business? That was news to me, considering I'd spoken with Dad the night before and he'd mentioned no travel plans. But if Brielle had been taken to the hospital by ambulance, he might not even know yet. I'll be there within the hour, I told Dr. Chen. The drive to the hospital was a blur of conflicting emotions. Part of me was convinced this was all an elaborate performance, the final act in Brielle's manipulation play. But another part of me wondered if I'd been wrong, if she really had been pregnant and the stress of Dad's investigation had caused her to lose the baby. The guilt was crushing. What if my refusal to change my wedding date had contributed to the loss of my sibling? I found Brielle in room 314, looking pale and fragile in a hospital gown, IV lines snaking into her arm. She turned when she heard my footsteps, and for a moment, I saw genuine vulnerability in her eyes that made my chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. "Sasha," she whispered, reaching out her hand toward me, "thank God you came." I approached her bed cautiously, still processing the surreal nature of the situation. "Brielle, what happened? The doctor said I lost the baby." Her voice broke and tears spilled down her cheeks. I woke up in the middle of the night with cramping and bleeding. By the time the ambulance got here, it was too late. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't known what I knew, if Dad hadn't shared his discoveries with me, I would have been completely convinced by her grief. "Where's Dad?" I asked. "Chicago, that big client meeting he's been preparing for. I tried calling him, but his phone is going straight to voicemail. I think he's in meetings all day." She gripped my hand suddenly, her eyes wide with what looked like genuine panic. "Sasha, I need you to help me. The doctor wants to do some additional tests, and I don't understand all the medical terms. I'm scared." This is when I realized the true depth of Brielle's manipulation. She had somehow gotten herself admitted to a real hospital with real doctors, creating a situation where I couldn't simply walk away or dismiss her claims. She was forcing me to play along with her deception in a setting where questioning her could make me look heartless. "What kind of tests?" I asked carefully. "Something about tissue samples and hormone levels. They want to make sure there aren't any complications." She squeezed my hand tighter. "Will you stay with me, please? I know we've had our differences, but you're family, and I'm so scared." I sat with her for 3 hours. 3 hours of watching her perform grief while nurses came in to check her vitals and offer condolences. 3 hours of her weaving an increasingly elaborate story about the pregnancy symptoms she'd been experiencing, the names she and Dad had been considering, the nursery plans they'd made. It was during those 3 hours that I received the phone call that turned everything upside down. My phone buzzed with Dad's number, and I stepped into the hallway to answer. "Sasha, thank God! I just got your messages. Is she really in the hospital?" "Dad, where are you? Brielle said you were in Chicago." "Chicago?" His voice was sharp with confusion. "I'm at home. I've been at home all morning working on divorce paperwork with my attorney. What's this about a miscarriage?" My blood ran cold. "She told the hospital you were out of town on business, unreachable. She said that's why she listed me as her emergency contact."
There was a long pause. Sasha, I haven't traveled for business in 6 months, and I never told her any client meeting in Chicago. The final piece of Brielle's manipulation came crashing down around me. She hadn't just faked the miscarriage. She had lied to the hospital about Dad's whereabouts to ensure that I would be the one called, the one forced to come and play along with her performance. Dad, get down here now, room 314, and bring that private investigator you hired. When Dad arrived 40 minutes later, the scene that unfolded was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. Brielle's shock at seeing him was quickly replaced by a different performance, righteous anger about his abandonment during her medical emergency.
"Where were you?" she demanded, tears streaming down her face. "I've been trying to reach you all morning. I lost our baby, and you weren't here." Dad's face was stone. "I was at home, Brielle, the same home where you left this morning, telling me you were going to have breakfast with your book club friends." "That's not... I went to breakfast, but then I started feeling sick and..." She looked between Dad and me, clearly realizing that her carefully constructed narrative was falling apart. "Brielle," Dad said quietly, "I know about the birth control pills. I know about the fake doctor appointments. I know you were never pregnant." The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The vulnerable, grieving woman disappeared, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, cold, calculating, and furious. "You went through my things," she hissed. "You violated my privacy. You faked a pregnancy to manipulate my daughter's wedding date," Dad replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of the accusation. "You created fake medical emergencies, lied about doctor appointments, and now you've somehow convinced a real hospital that you had a miscarriage?" "I never faked anything." But even as she said it, her eyes were darting around the room looking for escape routes or new angles of attack. That's when Dr. Chen returned, and the final piece of truth emerged. "Mrs. Thompson, we've completed the additional tests you requested. I have to tell you, the results are unusual. Your hormone levels show no indication of a recent pregnancy, and the tissue samples you provided..." She paused, looking confused. "I'm not sure how to explain this, but they appear to be non-human." The silence in the room was deafening. "Non-human?" Dad asked. Dr. Chen looked uncomfortable. "The lab thinks it might be animal tissue, possibly from a miscarriage experienced by a pet. Mrs. Thompson, I need to ask you directly, were you actually pregnant?" Brielle's face went through a series of expressions: shock, panic, calculation, and finally a rage so pure it was frightening to witness. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, sitting up in the hospital bed with sudden energy that contradicted her earlier frailty. "I want a different doctor. I want these tests done again. This is medical malpractice." But Dr. Chen was already making notes on her tablet, and I could see the shift in her demeanor as she realized what she was dealing with. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to need you to speak to our social worker and potentially our security team. Providing false information to medical personnel and submitting fraudulent tissue samples are serious matters." As hospital security entered the room and Brielle began a performance of hysteria that would have been impressive if it weren't so disturbing, I felt something break inside me. Not just my relationship with my stepmother, but my faith in my own judgment, in the idea that family meant safety, in the belief that people had limits to how cruel they could be. Watching the woman who had been part of my life for 8 years being escorted out of the hospital in handcuffs while screaming about conspiracies and medical malpractice, I realized that everything I thought I understood about loyalty, forgiveness, and giving people the benefit of the doubt had been weaponized against me. Dad drove me home in silence, both of us processing what we'd witnessed. It wasn't until we were sitting in my apartment that the full weight of it hit me. "She could have destroyed everything," I whispered, "if you hadn't investigated, if Jessica hadn't called, if the lab results had been different somehow." "But they weren't different," Dad said firmly. "The truth came out. It always does eventually." "But what if it hadn't, though? What if I had changed my wedding date? What if Marcus and I had spent our lives walking on eggshells around her lives?" For the first time since this ordeal had begun, I felt truly broken. Not angry, not determined, just broken. The woman I'd been trying to accommodate for years had been willing to fake a pregnancy, stage a miscarriage, and manipulate hospital staff just to prevent me from having my wedding on the date I had chosen. I don't know if I can do this anymore, I said, surprising myself with the admission. The wedding, the family drama, pretending that any of this is normal. Maybe we should just elope. Maybe we should just start over somewhere else and leave all of this behind. Dad was quiet for a long moment before he spoke. Sasha, what happened today was horrific. But it was also the end of something. Brielle's manipulation is over. Her lies have been exposed. The worst thing she could do to try to control your wedding has failed completely. But what if there's something else? What if she... Then we'll handle it, he said with a certainty I hadn't heard from him in years. But we won't let her win by making us abandon the life you've built, the celebration you've planned, the man you love. That would be letting her destroy your happiness even from jail. As I sat there that evening, emotionally exhausted and questioning everything, I had no idea that this dark valley I'd fallen into was about to become the foundation for the most important breakthrough of my entire journey. Sometimes you have to see the absolute worst in people before you can recognize the absolute best in yourself. But that night, all I could feel was the weight of how close I had come to losing everything and how much strength it was going to take to climb back up.
The breakthrough came in the most unexpected way possible. Through a phone call from Magnolia Gardens at 2:17 p.m. on a Friday, exactly 3 weeks before my wedding. I was sitting in my classroom after school, staring at the lesson plans I was supposed to be preparing for the following week, but couldn't focus on. Ever since the hospital incident 5 days earlier, I'd been moving through life like I was underwater. Everything felt muted, distant, surreal. Marcus had been incredible, checking on me constantly and handling all the wedding logistics I couldn't bring myself to deal with. But even his unwavering support couldn't shake the fog of doubt and exhaustion that had settled over me. When my phone rang with an unknown number, my first instinct was to let it go to voicemail. Unknown numbers had become sources of anxiety since Brielle's arrest. Reporters wanting statements, curious family members fishing for gossip, even a few prank callers who had somehow gotten hold of the story. But something made me answer. "Miss Thompson, this is Patricia Williamson from Magnolia Gardens. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." Patricia was our venue coordinator, a warm woman in her 50s who had been incredibly helpful throughout the planning process. Her calling directly was unusual. Most communication went through our wedding planner. "Hi, Patricia. Not at all. Is everything okay with the venue?" "Well, that's actually why I'm calling. We had a rather strange situation this morning, and I wanted to discuss it with you directly rather than going through your planner." My stomach dropped. What kind of situation? "We received a call from someone claiming to be you, requesting to cancel your August 15th reservation. The caller said there had been a death in the family and you needed to cancel immediately to avoid further charges." The blood drained from my face. "Patricia, I never called to cancel anything." "I didn't think so. The caller couldn't provide the security information we have on file for your account, and frankly, she didn't sound like you at all. But here's the interesting part. When I refused to process the cancellation without proper verification, she became quite aggressive, started making threats about lawsuits and claims she had the legal authority to make changes to your reservation." I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was going. "Did she give you a name?" "She said she was Brielle Thompson, your stepmother and legal proxy for family emergencies." Even from jail, even with her lies completely exposed, Brielle was still trying to sabotage my wedding. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also something else. It was the final push I needed to climb out of the valley I'd been trapped in. I called her back and told her what was happening and confirmed that my reservation was not in danger of cancellation. After I hung up, I sat in my empty classroom feeling something I hadn't experienced in days. Clarity. Pure, crystalline clarity about exactly what I needed to do.
Brielle hadn't called Magnolia Gardens as a last-ditch effort to ruin my wedding. She had called because she couldn't accept that her manipulation had failed. Even facing criminal charges, even with her lies completely exposed, she was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make my life revolve around her dysfunction. But here's what she hadn't counted on. Her desperation had finally shown me the truth about my own strength. For months, I'd been reacting to her manipulation, trying to accommodate it, trying to work around it, trying to minimize the damage it caused. Even when I'd started standing up to her, I'd still been operating from a defensive position, trying to protect what was mine, rather than actively building the life I wanted. But this phone call to my venue coordinator wasn't just another manipulation tactic. It was the desperate act of someone who had lost all control and was lashing out blindly, hoping to cause damage wherever she could. And recognizing it for what it was, the death throes of a failed manipulation campaign, finally freed me from the last vestiges of doubt and fear I'd been carrying. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. "Hey, babe, how are you feeling?" His voice was gentle, the way it had been for days as he watched me process everything that had happened. "I'm done," I said, and he could clearly hear the change in my tone. Done with what? Done being a victim in this story. Done letting Brielle's manipulation define how I feel about our wedding. Done walking around like I'm waiting for the next shoe to drop. I stood up and started pacing around my classroom, energy coursing through me for the first time in days. "Marcus, she just called our venue trying to cancel our reservation." "What? How is that even possible? Isn't she in jail?" "Apparently not anymore, but here's the thing. It doesn't matter. She can call venues, she can create new lies, she can try every manipulation tactic in the book. None of it has any power over us unless we give it power."
I could hear the smile in Marcus's voice when he responded. "There's my fiancé. I was wondering when she'd come back. She's back, and she's ready to get married. Actually, she's ready to do more than that." That evening, I did something I'd never done before in my adult life. I took complete, proactive control of a difficult situation instead of just reacting to it. First, I called Patricia at Magnolia Gardens back and asked her to document the attempted cancellation, including any identifying information from the caller. I also requested that she add additional security measures to our account and provide me with copies of all communication for potential legal proceedings. Then I called Detective Maria Rodriguez, the officer handling Brielle's fraud case, and reported the attempted venue cancellation as a violation of her bail conditions. I learned that Brielle had been released on bail 2 days earlier, information that somehow hadn't made its way to me through the proper channels. But most importantly, I called Jessica Martinez. "Sasha, how are you holding up after everything?" "I'm done holding up. I'm ready to fight back, and I think you might want to help me." Over the next hour, Jessica and I had the most important conversation of this entire ordeal. She told me things about Brielle that went far beyond the manipulation tactics I'd already learned about. She told me about financial fraud in their family, about relationships Brielle had destroyed through lies and manipulation, about a pattern of behavior that stretched back to their teenage years. "The thing about Brielle," Jessica explained, "is that she's never faced real consequences for her actions. Every time someone starts to see through her lies, she finds a way to make herself the victim, to shift blame, to start over somewhere else. Your father was just her most successful long-term project." "What do you mean by that?" "She specifically targeted him because he had money, stability, and a daughter she could use as a test case for her control tactics. Every time you gave in to one of her demands, every time you accommodated her manipulation, she was learning how to be more effective with him." The realization hit me like a physical blow. I hadn't just been a victim of Brielle's manipulation, I'd been unknowingly helping her perfect her techniques on my own father. "Jessica, I want her to face consequences, real consequences, not just for what she did to me, but for what she's done to Dad, and probably to other people we don't even know about. Then we need to build an airtight case,
and we need to do it fast before she has time to create new lies or find new victims. The next morning, I took a personal day from work and met with Dad's attorney, the private investigator he'd hired, and Detective Rodriguez. Together, we built a comprehensive timeline of Brielle's fraudulent behavior stretching back years. The private investigator had been busy. In addition to documenting the fake pregnancy, he'd uncovered evidence of financial fraud, credit cards opened in Dad's name without his knowledge, falsified medical bills submitted to insurance companies, even a loan application where she'd forged Dad's signature. This woman has been systematically defrauding your father for years, the investigator told us. The fake pregnancy was just the most recent and elaborate scheme. Detective Rodriguez was equally thorough. The hospital incident had opened up multiple charges: fraud, providing false information to medical personnel, filing false reports. Combined with the attempted venue cancellation, it painted a picture of someone who couldn't stop herself from committing crimes even while facing legal consequences for previous ones. But the breakthrough moment came when Jessica provided us with something we hadn't expected: other victims. She's been in touch with Michael and David, her ex-fiancés. They want to talk to the detective. Apparently, what she did to them was just as bad as what she did to your family, but they never pressed charges because they thought they were isolated incidents. Within a week, Detective Rodriguez had statements from 4 different victims spanning a decade. Brielle wasn't just a manipulative stepmother. She was a serial fraud artist who had been using romantic relationships to fund an increasingly elaborate lifestyle. The most shocking revelation came from Michael, her first ex-fiancé. Not only had she convinced him to give her money for a fake family emergency, but she had actually been married to someone else the entire time they were engaged. She was a bigamist on top of everything else. This changes everything, Detective Rodriguez told me during our final meeting before Brielle's arraignment. With this many victims and this much evidence, she's looking at serious prison time, not just probation and fines. But the real breakthrough wasn't the criminal case we were building against Brielle. The real breakthrough was what happened to me during those weeks of investigation and preparation. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just standing up for myself, I was actively fighting for justice. Not just for me, but for everyone she had victimized. I was using my voice not just to say no to manipulation, but to say never again to a pattern of abuse that had hurt multiple families. The scared, accommodating young woman who had been willing to change her wedding date to avoid conflict was gone. In her place was someone who knew that the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable other people's dysfunction, even when, especially when, those people are family. My wedding was going to be perfect, not because everything had gone according to plan, but because we'd fought for it and won.
August 15th dawned with the kind of perfect California sunshine that makes you believe in fairy tales. I woke up in my childhood bedroom at Mom's house, where I'd spent the night with my bridesmaids in a tradition that felt both nostalgic and triumphant. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely excited rather than anxious about the day ahead. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of hair appointments, makeup touch-ups, and the controlled chaos that comes with getting 6 women ready for a wedding. My bridesmaids, my college roommate Sarah, my cousin Emma, my work friend Lisa, and Marcus's sister Sophia had rallied around me through the entire Brielle ordeal with unwavering support and fierce loyalty. They'd helped me address new invitations when we thought we might have to change venues, celebrated with me when Dad decided to walk me down the aisle, and even offered to form a Brielle protection squad if she somehow showed up at the wedding. But as I stood in front of the full-length mirror in Mom's bedroom, adjusting my grandmother's pearl necklace and smoothing my dress one final time, I realized I wasn't thinking about Brielle at all. For the first time in months, my wedding day was actually about my wedding. The dress was everything I dreamed it would be. Elegant, but not overdone. Classic, but with personal touches that made it uniquely mine.
The pearl buttons had been sewn from my grandmother's wedding dress, and Mom had embroidered a tiny blue heart on the inside of the hem, invisible to everyone else but meaningful to me. Looking at my reflection, I saw not a bride who had survived family trauma, but a woman who had discovered her own strength and was ready to build a beautiful life with the man she loved. "You look absolutely radiant," Mom said from the doorway, tears already threatening her carefully applied makeup. "I am so proud of the woman you've become." Even after everything that happened? Especially after everything that happened. You handled this situation with more grace and strength than I ever could have at your age. You stood up for yourself without becoming bitter. You fought for your happiness without destroying other people in the process. That's real maturity, Sasha. The drive to Magnolia Gardens felt like a celebration parade. Mom, my bridesmaids, and I laughed and sang along to music in the limousine Dad had surprised us with that morning. As we pulled into the venue's circular driveway, I could see guests arriving in their summer wedding attire, faces bright with genuine excitement and joy. Magnolia Gardens looked like something out of a dream. The ceremony space was set up in the venue's beautiful garden courtyard, with white chairs arranged in perfect rows facing an arch covered in white roses and trailing greenery. String lights were already twinkling in the trees, even though it was only afternoon, creating an atmosphere that was both romantic and festive. But the moment that took my breath away was seeing Dad waiting for me in the bridal suite. He was wearing the navy suit we'd picked out together with a boutonniere of white roses that matched my bouquet perfectly. But more than his appearance, it was the expression on his face that made me stop in my tracks. He looked proud, peaceful, and completely present in a way I hadn't seen from him in years. "Sasha," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are absolutely beautiful." "Thank you for being here," I said, and I meant it in ways that went beyond just showing up to the wedding. "Thank you for teaching me what it means to have integrity. I know I haven't been the father you deserved for the past few years, but I promise you, I will be the father you deserve for the rest of my life." The ceremony itself was everything we'd dreamed it would be, and more. As the string quartet began playing and I walked down the aisle on Dad's arm, I saw Marcus waiting for me at the altar with the biggest smile I'd ever seen. His eyes were bright with tears of joy, and when he mouthed, "You're gorgeous," as I approached, I felt like I was floating. Our officiant, Pastor Williams from St. Margaret's Chapel, had worked with us to create a ceremony that reflected our journey together. Instead of generic vows, Marcus and I had written personal promises that acknowledged not just our love for each other, but our commitment to building a life based on honesty, mutual respect, and unwavering support. When it came time for my vows, I looked out at the faces of everyone we loved most and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for their presence. "Marcus," I began, my voice steady, but the emotions rushing through me. 6 months ago, I thought the biggest challenge we'd face as a couple would be choosing between chicken or fish for our wedding dinner. I had no idea that before we even made it to this altar, we'd face manipulation, lies, family betrayal, and the kind of crisis that could have torn us apart. But instead of tearing us apart, every challenge we faced made me more certain that you are the person I want to navigate life with. When my world felt like it was falling apart, you were my anchor. When I doubted my own worth, you reminded me of my strength. When I was ready to give up on this day, you helped me fight for our happiness. Marcus was crying openly now, not caring who saw.
"I promise to be that same anchor for you, to fight for our love the way you fought for mine, and to never let anyone or anything make us smaller than we are together. I promise to choose us every day for the rest of my life." When Marcus spoke his vows, he talked about resilience, about partnerships that make both people stronger, and about how watching me stand up for myself had made him fall in love with me all over again. By the time we kissed as husband and wife, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. The reception was pure magic. Dad gave a toast that acknowledged our journey without dwelling on the drama, focusing instead on the strength he'd witnessed in both Marcus and me. Mom spoke about the joy of watching your child find their person and their voice at the same time.
Marcus's parents, who had flown in from Texas, welcomed me into their family with warmth that made my heart full. But the moment that meant the most came during the father-daughter dance. As we swayed to "The Way You Look Tonight," a song Dad used to sing to me when I was little, he spoke quietly so only I could hear. "I want you to know that these past few months taught me something important about what it means to be a parent," he said. "It's not about being liked or avoiding conflict. It's about raising someone strong enough to stand up to anyone, even you, when they need to." "I learned that from you," I replied. "Maybe not the lesson you meant to teach, but the one I needed to learn." "I'm sorry it took me so long to be proud of your strength instead of threatened by it." "You're here now," I said simply. "That's what matters." As the evening progressed, I found myself taking mental snapshots of perfect moments. Marcus spinning me around the dance floor while friends cheered, my college roommates recreating our old group photos with tears of laughter, and the elderly couple at table 6 who told me they'd been married 62 years and that they could see the same kind of love in Marcus and me. Around 10 p.m., as the party was reaching its peak, Jessica Martinez appeared at my table. I hadn't been sure she would come. She'd RSVP'd, yes, but given everything that had happened with Brielle, I wouldn't have blamed her for wanting to stay away. "Sasha, I couldn't leave without telling you something," she said, pulling me aside. "What you did, building that case against my sister, making sure she faced consequences, that was the bravest thing I've ever seen. I couldn't have done it without you." "But you could have. That's what made it brave. You didn't need my information to stand up for yourself. You were already doing that. All I did was provide ammunition for a fight you were already winning." She hugged me tightly. "My sister spent years trying to convince people that manipulation and lies were normal family dynamics. You proved that they're not. You saved your father and probably saved future victims we'll never even know about." As the evening wound down and Marcus and I prepared for our grand exit under a shower of sparklers held by our guests, I felt a profound sense of completion. Not just because we'd gotten married, but because we'd gotten married as the people we'd become through this experience, stronger, wiser, more committed to truth and authenticity. 6 months later, as I write this story, Brielle is serving an 18-month sentence for fraud, conspiracy, and filing false reports. She plea bargained to avoid a longer trial, and part of her sentence included restitution payments to Dad and her other victims. Dad's divorce was finalized quietly, and he's been seeing a therapist to process his experience with psychological manipulation. But more importantly, Dad and I have a relationship now that's based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than accommodation and guilt. He comes to Sunday dinners at our apartment, helps Marcus with home improvement projects, and has become the father I always hoped he could be. Marcus and I bought a house 6 blocks from the elementary school where I teach. We're talking about starting our family next year, and we've already agreed that our children will grow up understanding that love means supporting each other's dreams, not diminishing them. I still teach 2nd grade, and I love watching my students discover their own voices and learn to advocate for themselves. Every time one of my 8-year-olds stands up to a playground bully or speaks up when something isn't fair, I'm reminded that strength is something we can model and teach. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the drama that surrounded our engagement, if I wish things had been simpler and easier. The answer is always no. That experience taught me who I really am and what I'm capable of. It showed me the difference between people who love me and people who want to control me. Most importantly, it gave me the strength to build a life based on my own values rather than other people's expectations. The truth is, I'm grateful for every challenge we faced because each one revealed another layer of resilience I didn't know I possessed. I'm grateful for Jessica's courage in speaking up, for Dad's eventual willingness to see the truth, for Mom's steady support, and for Marcus's unwavering belief in our love. But mostly, I'm grateful for the moment I stopped trying to accommodate dysfunction and started fighting for my own happiness. That decision not just saved my wedding day, it saved my life. As I finish writing this story on our 6-month anniversary, Marcus is in the kitchen making dinner and humming the song we danced to at our reception. The evening light is streaming through the windows of our real home, built on truth and trust, and the kind of love that makes you braver than you thought possible. This is what victory looks like. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of people who choose love over control, truth over manipulation, and growth over comfort. This is what happens when you refuse to make yourself smaller to accommodate other people's dysfunction. This is what happens when you fight for your own story and win.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.